I'm Susan Wingrove-Reed. It's great to be in the presence of, in Zoom presence land, with Elizabeth Schulze, our guest, our music advisor for this year's Anchorage Symphony. And we have been underway with some very exciting rehearsals for a concert that everybody is super, super excited about. And it's all American voices. And as I write a little bit about the rep and at rehearsal and so on, I've just been fascinated to try to think, how did you put together this particular assortment of composers for this presentation, Elizabeth?
That's a really good question, because it is a matter of evolution. We were planning, gosh, as long as a year ago, how are we going to make a season, and what is it going to look like as we come back to the stage? And we were going to start with smaller ensembles and then work to the larger. And that actually didn't work out. In September, we had probably one of our biggest ensembles right away. And that's because the pandemic's reach had changed, and the opportunity for an audience and getting the full orchestra back presented itself immediately in the fall, thank goodness. And then we went sort of back in November to the original plan, which was a smaller ensemble concert, which I was so proud of, because I think everyone played so brilliantly in that. It's hard to play Mozart when you haven't been playing in 19 months or how long it's been. And now we're back to the big one. This one was planned for later in the season, but because of logistics, availability of guest artists and all of that thing, those issues, this was moved to January. Okay, so that's the logistics of it, and the reason for us bouncing back in the new year with a really huge orchestra. But the repertoire started a little bit smaller, because again, we were thinking, do we want to even have an intermission? Do we want our audience in and then out so that they don't intermingle and put themselves at risk? And as that issue disappeared a little bit by September, we were thinking, well, no, let's make this concert a little bit longer, because even though I had chosen very difficult works that need a lot of rehearsal, it was still too short. The Barber Symphony No. 1 is only about 19 minutes long. It is as dense as it possibly can be, very much like Sibelius' Seventh Symphony, which is so concise and so dense, but is an entire, it almost explores worlds beyond Mahler in some sense, in terms of what it does as a symphony. And Barber had based his idea of his first symphony on that form. So it's a shorter piece. And, we said, oh, we need to flesh out the concert. So we always knew we were going to do Gershwin. We always knew we were going to do Barber. And I had been excited about a very new composer on the scene today, Carlos Simon, who is absolutely brilliant. He's only in his early 30s at this point. And he wrote a very cool piece that I thought would really it'd be fun for our audiences to hear. It is a walk down a block in Harlem. It was based on 6 paintings, kind of collages done by Romar Bearden, who was an important mid-century into the 70s artist who really capitalized on his own experience as an African-American and bringing his culture and his vision for the future of his people. It was very important for him to be promoting and providing uplift emotionally and in terms of inspiration to his community.
Interject a second. It reminds me, last night I attended on Zoom a community conversation by the Alaska Black Caucus that does a weekly hour-long thing, and it was a Martin Luther King exploration and racial healing was the topic. And I was reminded when I was learning about Bearden and the paintings and collages that he created, that he was the founder, it's called a founding member of a group called The Spiral, which was a grouping of African-American artists of all kinds who were committed to making sure that art also was part of the civil rights movement.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Really well into a lot of things that people are talking about and exploring, particularly this week. So I just thought that that was kind of important.
Absolutely. And honestly, this was not planned for Martin Luther King week.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was supposed to be happening in another month. At any rate, concert too short. So we're doing it for sure, the Simon, for sure the wonderful Rhapsody in Blue featuring Dr. Timothy Smith, who is a colleague of mine who I've known since graduate school and who I've admired, and also the barber. So what else could we do? Well, I was thinking of what short works, dance works, and I thought of two great dance works. One by Florence Price, The Dances in the Canebrakes, which is a orchestral work only because it was William Grant Still who orchestrated these three piano works that she wrote at the end of her life, and in literally her last year. And then, of course, the El Salón Mexico, because it uses so much percussion, it's so much fun. And again, it is someone observing and recording and communicating, as is the Dances in the Canebrakes, because we know for sure that the kind of wonderful comfortable middle class upbringing that Florence Price had, she was probably not chopping sugarcane in Arkansas, but she knew the stories and the songs and the dances and the memory of that history of her people, and that who were still doing that in Arkansas at that time. So she was bringing to life, again, aspects of her culture. Copland was like a visitor, kind of like an American in Paris. He was in Mexico, and he was brought to a dance hall in which he encountered literally the social strata of Mexico coming together to dance in the same place to different rhythms and different music. And he brings all that into his piece as well. So anyway, it was an opportunity for more voices to be added to the program, but also I think it widened the conversation about, who are we as people? How do we see other people? How do we express peoples and places and ideas? Because again, Barber's piece is more abstract. It is the most abstract piece. I would even say that the Rhapsody in Blue really brings more sense of people and place into its work because he meant it to. Whereas the Barber was grappling with the big form and with musical. A lot of times people say music is just music. Don't try to put in any programmatic things, And I appreciate that, but I also know that composers do start with programs in their heads or inspiration that is extra musical. And so we have a combination in this concert, something that is rather abstract and dealing with the symphonic form itself in a very successful and interesting way and beautiful way. And then a number of pieces that seek to really communicate to listeners peoples and places and times and energy and history and culture. It's just a fabulous kind of history lesson, but also it's contemporary and it's talking about us as well, I think, especially in the Carlos Simon, which brings in so much, not only jazz, but also, and he talks about, if you've read some of his interviews, talks about how he loves the classical language because he feels he can do more with it than the jazz that he has a background in, the jazz language, that has certain limitations for him, but rather with the classical language, which I'm assuming he means embraces jazz as well as one of the tools and techniques that he can do more. And it's a wonderful atmospheric piece that just exudes energy. And I love it.
Oh, it's a perfect opening to a concert that will bring so much joy and happiness about being human. And I think that's a really important thing to feel right now. It's just,
I agree.
And this commitment to the voices of people, because the common thread I kept running across as I researched the program notes was wanting to connect with real people versus the socially elite in a concert hall.
Right.
But
exactly.
Barber had the same, I mean, this was around the same time period that they were starting to explore that philosophy in the mid 1930s. And then to have people like Simon, and who I just burst out laughing when I read in an interview that he gave that he really didn't get into classical music much until he was in college, because it had all been more improvisatory based, etc. And then he's just really fused so many things together. Just such an exciting composer. And then Florence Price is more. I mean, there's just, and I love that you have programmed with that kind of thinking this entire season, which includes voices that are unfamiliar and familiar, which is, I think, so important for the future of symphony orchestras as we come out of COVID. And that it's not always going to be overture, concerto, symphony on a concert by white European composers. So,
and if it is, let's make it fresh. Like next month we have Billy Child's concerto, and it is filling that concerto spot. We have a traditional overture, a concerto, and a symphony, but we're going to mix it up a little bit and freshen up the the experience with something of today and a beautiful solos. But I just wanted to get back to one thing, because you're a pianist, a marvelous pianist, so you would appreciate the difference between the piano works by Florence Price that she wrote at the end of her and I wanted to just say I have a theory about what possibly those were written for. She died in 1953, literally weeks before she was going to Europe to hear a performance of her concert of one of her I think orchestral suites, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if she would have been asked to play herself, because she was a fine pianist. And these three pieces could have been used as Mozart would take along his concerto. She may have brought these three pieces along to give on a recital or perform, or they could have been used for commercial publication as salon works for people in the privacy of their own home. They are intimate, but they are also I find fascinating because they harken back to older dance forms, the rag, the cakewalk, the beguine.
Yes.
But all of those have their roots in African-American dance and rhythms and songs of the enslaved people, where they brought, Caribbean brought beguine and other forms. So those evolved in the 20th century early on. So she would have known them very well. And that would have made sense for her to bring those into her Canebrakes dances. But I also think her silent film work, the fact that she was a silent film pianist, because the characterization, you see the people who are actually dancing. You have a sense of who they are as a people, very much like Copland tried to do with his, and I think achieved with his Rhapsody, El Salón, México. But I wonder if we are seeing her sort of harken back to her past, not only her past in Arkansas, the people that were in Arkansas singing and dancing that she heard or knew about or heard about, but also her own ability on the spur of the moment to characterize what's going on in the screen. And
yes,
like the last piece, which is the Silk Hat and the Cane. I can't help, I know I shouldn't think of Charlie Chaplin or someone like that, but I can't help but think of someone up on the screen who's twirling his cane and tipping his hat and the nimble dancer. This I really just immediately I thought of a characterization by someone who was thinking visually about the music as she was writing it, and I find it wonderful. It's so interesting how Mr. Still has orchestrated the piece, because it takes it out of its comfort zone. I think they are very successful piano pieces.
Yes.
And then he starts to enlarge it. And sometimes I feel the piano works are more concise and more able to to make the harmonic shifts that she does a lot more easily because they're all within the hand, whereas he's stretching it out and giving it to different instruments to play. And there's a certain level of awkwardness that has to be overcome in rehearsal in order to get that movement harmonically that is easier on the piano. So these are challenges. It's kind of wonderful to see, just as Ferd Grofe orchestrated the Rhapsody in Blue, that we are hearing an orchestration that certainly was originally approved by Gershwin, although we're doing the 42 version, the 1942, and so that's after Gershwin's death. But it's just meant to soup up the sound a little bit more and get it away from the jazz band that was the original accompaniment orchestra. But anyway, lots to think about, lots of resonances for me personally. It's been such a wonderful journey to explore these works and also see the connections and see them more and more as we rehearse, and also as I just study the works and the people who wrote them a little bit more.
Yeah, it's I'm just so grateful that we're back in producing art mode, where we can do all of those things in the preparation process, the study and the rehearsal, and being with other people to create art. And I'm reminded of something our medical officer, Dr. Zink, said about maneuvering COVID, that it's going to be here for a long time and we have to learn to maneuver it. And she said that people really need art. They need the arts. And so if we can follow every protocol we can think of and try to keep everybody safe, but yet we've got to keep art alive and moving forward. And I just feel like the symphony, which is symphonying on, and many kudos to Sherry, our executive director, and our staff for helping keep us alive, and the board of directors and musicians, all of us. But we're moving forward, and we're evolving to present programs that are coming out of COVID, are exactly the kinds of works that I think all orchestras should be looking at. So it's exciting. True. And the diversity and inclusiveness factor, plus keeping alive all of the classic greats. It's just that's an important thing. So yeah.
I think for me, and I want to talk about the we haven't really talked about the Rhapsody in Blue. We'll have to talk about that. But I was just going to say, in terms of diversity, my interest is in showing both that there were folks who had enormous amounts of great things to say that, continued to be sort of invited halfway in, but never completely welcomed. Right. And what I am so grateful for is that in this 20th century, at least so far in the first quarter of it, orchestras are just opening wide the gates for all conversation, and showing that there has been a dialogue for men. It has been by fits and starts, but in America especially, a lot of people actually participated in what we call the classical music tradition, whether it was bringing a piano into their home, taking lessons. There was a real reverence in almost all communities in the 20s and 30s that were affluent, that were rising, that music lessons were a part of that having an orchestra in an elementary school, or teaching music in schools, that was aspirational, and that was showing a level of sophistication. And I'm thinking back, and this Ramar Bearden went to the high school my mother did in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's why I was like, oh my God, because did in my mother's class was Lauren Mazel, and there was just a bunch of superstars that have gone through that high school for some reason, Peabody High School in Pittsburgh. And so of course, then I was just thinking about how she played the piano in the orchestra while Mr. Mazel was, conducting and playing, and he was just one of the guys. He was on the baseball team, and he was just one of the guys. And but it was part of the culture of high school. And now, of course, we thank God for pep bands and marching bands, because I think music in the schools would have died very quickly had sports not needed the ancient drums to drum them to their gladiator, efforts. That is what saved music in the schools in the 60s and 70s when there was this elitism thing going on. Unfortunately, strings aren't invited onto the football field, and so some of that got lost. But I mean, always, if you look at the texture of this country and its aspirational levels, its aspirational feelings and efforts, it has tried to include larger voices. But I think now in the 21st century, gates are really much more open. And, I just love being able to have the opportunity to give voice to those who were excluded in the past. Yeah. So Rhapsody in Blue, it is one of the most iconic American pieces. And we're ending the program with it because on some level, it just makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
That basically one of the earliest works on the program, it is the earliest work on the program, which just burst open, again, communication between the jazzers and popular music and classical music in a way that horrified some and delighted most others. It's great to have this piece because it is a landmark on so many levels for American music. Mm-hmm. And it has been our calling card. I would say almost more than any other piece throughout the world in terms of American classical music. For better or worse, it's been our calling card. Yeah.
I think, and that could be debatable. I wanted to share that story about the conductor at the premiere, Whiteman, and this was in a little program note compilation that I have that's really ancient, but there's some really little gems of anecdotes, historical. And this was stated that Whiteman does not conduct. He trembles, he wobbles, he quivers, a piece of jazz jelly, conducting the orchestra with the back of his right trouser leg at times. And then went on to describe the premiere as the antics of the players. We won't tell the symphony players about this because it might inspire shenanigans. But the clarinetist who plays the iconic solo wore a battered top hat and sometimes played into it. The players rocked about. They did not play like an army, but like the melomaniacs they are, bitten by rhythms that would have twiddled the toes of Saint Anthony. And I just thought, so charming. And then in the audience were people like Chrysler and Heifetz and Rachmaninoff. And I mean, you talk about this bringing together classical and jazz that night. What a hoot if you could have attended that. Wow. With Gershwin.
I mean, historic. And half of Gershwin's part hadn't been even written yet. He was improvising. I mean, a la Mozart. Mozart did the same thing. Beethoven did the same thing. If they couldn't get their part done, it was in their head. And and also Gershwin didn't even realize he was actually doing it until 3 weeks before, or 5 weeks before the actual show. He had turned down Whiteman. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And Whiteman advertised it anyway, and then and Gershwin was, well, I guess I better live up to what's been written in the paper, because then it will look like I'm a coward,
So here's to the bravery of the artists and and here's to our symphony colleagues for diving in the midst of a pandemic and a surge right now. Just we're doing our best one day at a time, staying healthy and trying to play. And Elizabeth, it's such a pleasure. The rehearsals are so fun, so fast-paced and intense. And we love diving into the rhythmic intricacies and making sure everything is aligning so we can.
So really... American, isn't it?
Yeah, very
rhythmic
American.
Intricacy. Yes, I think so. Yeah, it's just there's something. The beat goes on in American music, and it's just so important throughout. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So Anchorage Symphony Week, and hoping to see people in the concert hall and through live streaming if you're more comfortable at home. And also looking forward to a concert just about another month away that will involve the Billy Childs Concerto with the amazing Rachel Barton Pine on violin and other treats, so including Beethoven's Second Symphony. So Elizabeth, thank you, and here's to the Anchorage Symphony and symphonying on together in Anchorage, Alaska.
Amen. Thank you, Susan.